You, the chosen one, hear this now, for the Lord would not have you remain unaware of the magnitude you carry. What disturbs them is not what you've said, nor what you've done. It is your existence, uncontrolled, unbound, and unshaken, that unravels their illusions. They are not angry because you wronged them. They are undone because you walk in authority they cannot explain. You breathe, and their power structures tremble. You enter a room, and without a single word, something ancient shifts. Not because you are loud, not because you seek attention, but because your presence carries the weight of heaven's assignment. You did not flip their table. You simply took your seat at it, and suddenly they could no longer digest their own pride. The moment you arrived, the spiritual atmosphere adjusted. The illusions they once relied on began to bend and buckle under the force of a truth they were never prepared to encounter. You were sent, not selected by man, but appointed by God. What you carry cannot be imitated. What you embody cannot be replicated. Because what surrounds you is not charisma, it is consecration. There is no script to follow when a chosen one appears. No mask survives the radiance of divine authenticity. And so, without lifting a hand, without speaking a word, you've become the collision point between spiritual memory and human denial. That is why they stare too long. That is why they whisper your name in confusion, even in your absence. Because when you entered, something dormant in them was summoned, something they buried long ago to survive in a world built on pretense. You walked in clothed in truth, and their false confidence evaporated, not because you exposed them, but because your very presence revealed who they were, never willing to become. So know this, you are not the cause of their chaos. You are the mirror God placed before them. You are not the disturbance. They were already disturbed, and your light merely made it undeniable. You did not choose to be this, but heaven did. And because of that, your existence is not neutral, it is prophetic. You are not just here to inspire, you are here to confront. And that confrontation has begun not with a declaration but with your very breath. You, the chosen one, you did not enter to compete. You did not seek to outperform or outshine. Yet the moment you arrived, everything they built upon ego began to tremble. Why? Because your mere existence revealed the hollowness of their throne. They once believed they were the central figure in every room, the loudest voice in every conversation. But then you entered not with arrogance, not with a crown of man's approval, but with something far more threatening. Authenticity forged in fire, presence refined by pain, and authority granted by heaven. You walked in with no need for applause. You carried no resume of your suffering. But the atmosphere testified on your behalf. The room adjusted to you not because you demanded it, but because heaven had already gone before you. You are not a guest in their story. You are a divine interruption in the script they wrote to protect their illusions. As C.S. Lewis wrote in letters to Malcolm chiefly on prayer, "We may ignore, but we can nowhere evade the presence of God. The world is crowded with him. He walks everywhere incognito." This truth illuminates your divine interruption. The atmosphere shifts because God's inescapable presence goes before you, disrupting illusions, incognito, marking you as a vessel of his authority. Their confidence was never true. It was borrowed, brittle, and dependent on people who didn't know better. But you knew better, and that alone made you dangerous. Because when you speak, there is weight. When you are silent, there is pressure. And when you merely observe, they begin to unravel not because of anything you do, but because you carry what they tried to imitate: true, unshakable identity. What terrified them most was not your success. It was your stillness, the way you didn't strive, the way you didn't flinch, the way you held space without needing to fill it, because only someone who has died and resurrected on the inside can hold that kind of weight without breaking. You didn't study dominance. You lived through devastation. You didn't memorize power. You bled to discover it. Your presence isn't an act. It's a testimony. And every time they see you, they are forced to reckon with the uncomfortable truth that their greatness was always just performance, while yours was always the result of consecration. And that is why their praise feels cold, why their smiles tremble, and why their applause is laced with envy. Because they know, even if they never say it, you were not made, you were forged. Pause, right here, and comment, I am the awakening. Let this be your declaration. Let the spirit realm know you are not reacting, you are rising. Heaven saw this moment before you ever got here. Now it's time to answer the call. You, the chosen one, do you understand the depth of what you carry? You, the chosen one, do you understand the depth of what you carry? You did not simply walk into their life. You activated a memory they buried beneath survival. You stirred something ancient within them, something holy they long forgot or perhaps never dared to embrace. And now they are disoriented not because of who you are, but because you reminded them of who they were meant to be. Your presence is not just magnetic, it is disruptive. Because when you stand before them, you don't just exist, you radiate the echo of a truth they have long silenced, not with words, not with sermons, not with correction, but with the undeniable clarity of someone who remembers their origin. They tried to label it arrogance, but it was never arrogance. It was remembrance. You did not quote their scriptures or confront their beliefs, but something in your gaze, your posture, your stillness summoned the part of their soul that once danced with heaven and has since gone numb. That summons is what rattled them. Because now, after encountering you, they cannot go back to pretending their distractions fulfill them. They cannot unfeel the void. They cannot unsee the contradiction. C.S. Lewis in the Screwtape Letters wrote, "There is no neutral ground in the universe. Every square inch, every split second is claimed by God and counterclaimed by Satan." This insight underscores the disruptive power of your presence. Your stillness is a claim for God's truth, challenging the counterfeit identities they've built, stirring their souls to confront the spiritual battle within. You are not the source of their discomfort. You are the trigger of their awakening. And they don't know whether to follow you or flee from you, because in you they glimpse the clarity they once longed for, but now fear. You carry a stillness that exposes their chaos, a knowing that reveals their confusion, a light that does not ask permission to shine. And so they stand before you torn, drawn by what you carry, yet offended by what it reveals. Because in your presence their masks feel heavy, their ambitions feel hollow, their rehearsed selves begin to suffocate under the weight of your truth. You did not break them. You did not condemn them. You simply existed with such spiritual integrity that the soul within them remembered what it was like to be alive. And that remembrance, though holy, came with grief for all the years they spent asleep. And so now they hover around you with awe and hostility, not because of something you did, but because without a single command, you have already disrupted their exile and pulled their spirit toward its forgotten home. You, the chosen one, what they tried on others, they tried on you. The tactics, the games, the emotional traps dressed in false kindness, the guilt cloaked in concern, the silent treatments designed to make others beg for validation. These were their weapons refined through years of subtle control. But you did not flinch. You did not bite. You did not bend because you were never confused. You were observing, and that unnerved them more than any confrontation ever could. You didn't play along. You didn't react. You didn't respond the way others did. And in that silence, in that stillness, you shattered their illusion of power. They thought they had mastered the art of manipulation until they met someone who no longer operated from ego. You had no need to defend yourself. You had no thirst for attention. You were not playing a game. You were walking in discernment, and that made you ungovernable. Their confusion turned to panic when they realized their best manipulations fell flat before your peace. The triggers didn't trigger you. The bait didn't hook you. The trap didn't close because you never stepped inside it. They tried to measure your silence as weakness. But what they encountered was something far more unsettling, a soul that had already faced the fire and no longer feared the flames. You once would have responded. Years ago, before the wilderness shaped you, before the Spirit trained you, before the voice of God taught you stillness. But now you do not react, you perceive. You do not argue, you discern. You do not chase, you release. And that release is what shook them. Because when you refused to engage, you took back authority they never truly had. They didn't just lose a power struggle. They lost access to your mind, to your energy, to your light. And the absence of your energy was louder than any confrontation could ever be. You didn't expose them with accusation. You exposed them with restraint. You let their performance collapse under the weight of its own emptiness. And now they are left with the one thing they were never prepared to face themselves, in the quiet aftermath of a battle they could not manipulate you into fighting. That chosen one is power, and that is why they cannot forget you. You, the chosen one. What you carry cannot be manufactured, and that alone sets you apart. You did not learn how to be real. You simply refused to become false. And that decision, born not from arrogance but from alignment, has become a holy flame that exposes every counterfeit around you. They spent years perfecting personas, curating images, rehearsing charm, and collecting accolades, not to become, but to be seen. And then you arrived, not polished, not seeking validation, but marked by raw truth. You entered with no costume and their masks began to melt, because your authenticity is not loud, but it is absolute. You do not wear your pain as decoration. You wear it as evidence. Evidence that you have walked through fire, and instead of letting it consume you, you let it consecrate you. The scars you carry are not shameful. They are sacred. They are proof that you died to ego and rose in truth. And this they cannot mimic. You carry the kind of power that cannot be explained in worldly terms. It is not based on status or strategy. It is based on surrender. The surrender that happens in silence, in solitude, in secret places where no one applauds. You emerged from those places with presence, and that presence now confronts their pretense. They tried to meet you with perfection, but perfection is hollow next to wholeness. Because you, chosen one, are not whole because you are untouched. You are whole because you embraced every broken piece, gathered them into light, and made peace with your shadows. You became the person they pretended to be. And when they looked at you, they saw a reflection that demanded honesty. That is why they cannot rest in your presence. That is why their admiration feels like fear. That is why their compliments carry undertones of confusion. Because you didn't come to impress. You came to exist in truth, in boldness, in sacred defiance of superficiality. You are a living rebuke to the falsehoods they built their identity upon. And though they may never confess it deep down, they long to be as free as you are. They envy your courage, your transparency, your refusal to hide. But until they are willing to shed their masks, they will watch from the distance, drawn to your light, yet blinded by what it demands of them. You, the chosen one. There is a reason the atmosphere changes when you walk into a room. It is not your voice. It is not your appearance. It is not charisma, nor effort, nor anything the world can produce. What they sense, what disturbs them, is your spiritual clearance. It is the divine authority you carry silently, invisibly, and undeniably. You are granted access through doors they cannot see, and you walk with keys forged in pain, tested in silence, and confirmed by heaven. While others scramble to be seen, you have already been marked by the unseen. You do not chase rooms. They shift to receive you. You do not beg for entry. You are already permitted. They try to understand you, to mimic you, to match you, but they cannot. Because what you carry was not learned. It was entrusted. They may have gathered influence through strategy and performance, but yours came through obedience, through surrender, through fire. They wear crowns of status. You wear the oil of appointment, and it terrifies them, because when you speak, the spirit world listens. When you move, realms respond. When you are silent, Heaven is still working on your behalf. C.S. Lewis, in the Screwtape Letters, wrote, "Courage is not simply one of the virtues, but the form of every virtue at the testing point." This profound truth captures the essence of your spiritual authority. Your unshakable presence forged through trials embodies courage at its testing point, radiating divine favor that unsettles their fragile facades, marking you as one entrusted by heaven. They cannot compete with this. They were never meant to. They speak of power, but you live under covering. They build on connections, but you were built in covenant. Their strength is performative. Yours is prophetic. And when they stand near you, their souls recognize it, even if their minds reject it. They don't know why their confidence falters around you, why their plans feel unstable in your presence, why their egos suddenly tremble. But the spirit within them knows you are not like them. You walk with something they cannot earn, cannot fake, and cannot buy. You were not lifted by applause. You were called from the shadows. You were not crowned by man. You were affirmed in the wilderness. The world did not make you, and so the world cannot unmake you. That is why they are unsettled. Because you are not just operating in your gift, you are moving under divine instruction, and no imitation can stand next to that kind of authenticity. They may gather followers, you carry favor, they may chase influence, but you walk in inheritance. And while they build their kingdoms on shifting sands, you have been rooted in a foundation they cannot shake. So do not be surprised when they stare, when they whisper, when they try to decipher what cannot be explained. You are a mystery to those who dwell only in the natural, because you were shaped by the supernatural. You do not just exist. You have been assigned, and heaven's approval has made you untouchable in ways that earthly status never could bow. You, the chosen one, what they cannot grasp is that your silence was never weakness. It was never avoidance. It was never the absence of insight or response. Your silence is deliberate. Your silence is power. It is surgical. While they filled the air with noise, posturing, distraction, and veiled manipulation, you remained still not because you didn't notice, but because you saw too much. You were not passive. You were discerning. You were watching the fault lines form beneath their polished words and rehearsed masks. And while they underestimated your stillness, you were already dismantling the structure of their false power, one unspoken truth at a time. They mistook your quietness for vulnerability. They thought you were unsure, uncertain, hesitant. But the truth is, you had already measured the weight of every word and chosen not to waste them. You knew the battlefield wasn't made of arguments or volume. It was made of energy, of discernment, of spiritual authority. And in that realm you held the higher ground. Your silence wasn't empty. It was charged. It was watchful. It was a divine scalpel cutting directly into the weak points they worked so hard to hide. They tried to provoke you, bait you, pull you down into their chaos, but you didn't move. You didn't react, and that terrified them. What they do not understand is that your silence was a verdict, not a retreat. You weren't ignoring them. You were exposing them without ever having to name their sin aloud. You let their fruits speak. You let their patterns convict. You let the weight of their own falsehoods press against the stillness you carried. And in that sacred quiet they came undone, because the light you walked in demanded that everything false must bend or break, and they broke not by your voice but by the presence you refused to distort for their comfort. They still wonder what you were thinking. They still replay your silence like a mystery they can't solve. But you know the truth. You weren't confused. You were finished. You weren't afraid. You were aligned. And that alignment gave you the power to walk away without a storm while they collapsed in one of their own making. You didn't punish them. You let them see themselves without your energy to mask their instability. And in doing so, you revealed the power of a chosen one who speaks only when heaven speaks through them. You, the chosen one, what wounded them was not your anger. It was your absence, not your rejection, but your release. You didn't push them away to hurt them. You stepped away to protect your peace. But in doing so, you shattered something they held sacred, not love, not loyalty, but the illusion of their own irreplaceability. They built a fantasy in which they were the central figure, the one you needed, the one you would always orbit. And then you walked out of the orbit, and the illusion crumbled. They never truly saw you. They saw themselves through the reflection you provided. You were a mirror to their inflated sense of worth, a mirror that made them feel bigger than they truly were. And so what they cherished was not your essence, it was the image they projected onto you. Your light became their borrowed brilliance. Your depth gave weight to their shallow words. Your energy gave relevance to their presence. But none of it was theirs to begin with. It was yours. And when you pulled it back, they weren't left without you. They were left without the version of themselves they only knew through your glow. They called it heartbreak, but it was ego collapse. They named it betrayal, but it was truth unveiled. What hurt them most was realizing that you never needed them to define your value, that their proximity to your power did not make them powerful, that their presence in your story was never the source of your strength. It was merely a chapter that had reached its divine conclusion. You didn't sever the connection to be cruel. You let it go because it could no longer carry the weight of your calling. You could no longer shrink to make them feel sufficient. You could no longer pretend the bond was sacred when it was built on codependency, not covenant. And so you did the holy thing, the hard thing. You walked away without hatred. And in doing so, you forced them to face what they had buried beneath your presence, the dullness of their own unhealed soul. Now they linger in the space where your energy used to be, not because they miss you, but because they miss the version of themselves that only existed in your light. And no matter how many people they surround themselves with, now they know deep down that the connection they felt was not just emotional. It was spiritual, and it was never about possession. It was about reflection. And when the mirror left, they were forced to see themselves, and they could not bear the silence. You, the chosen one, what unsettles them most is not what you say, but what you perceive before any words are spoken. You operate in a language older than sound, more precise than speech. You do not wait for explanations. You do not rely on appearances. You discern energy, and in doing so, you move in a realm they were never trained to navigate. Where they rehearse their words, you feel their intentions. Where they craft impressions, you trace the origin of their motives. While they cling to surface truths, you pierce through into the roots. You read silence like scripture. You feel deception before it manifests. You recognize hidden pain behind performance, envy behind praise, desperation beneath composure. Not because you are suspicious, but because your spirit is awake. They try to manage how they appear to others, but around you their masks slip without warning. Not because you force them, but because your presence makes pretense unbearable. You see too much without having to look too hard. You feel too deeply without asking to. This gift is not a skill you practiced. It is the residue of pain endured, surrender, embraced, and spirit refined. It is divine inheritance. That's why they unravel around you, because their carefully built personas begin to glitch under the light of your knowing. They sense they cannot hide, but they do not know why. Their words fall flat. Their roles feel hollow. And their strategies, which once controlled rooms, lose power in your presence. They may not be able to explain it, but their soul recognizes it. You are not navigating the world from the surface. You are speaking straight to the spiritual architecture. And because of that, they feel exposed not by accusation, but by resonance. You carry the frequency of truth, and everything false within them begins to tremble. You don't confront them yet. They feel confronted. You don't challenge them yet. They feel threatened. It is not personal. It is spiritual. Because truth doesn't need to speak loudly to be felt. It only needs to be present. You chosen one are fluent in energies they've spent their lives denying. You perceive the unseen, and that alone shifts the balance of every room you enter. You weren't trained for this. You were chosen for it. And every moment you choose to walk in this, knowing you disarm the illusion that the world has tried to maintain, you, the chosen one, what they ran into wasn't pride. It wasn't cruelty. It wasn't coldness. It was holiness. The line they tried to cross wasn't drawn out of fear. It was forged by fire. Your boundaries are not flimsy preferences. They are sacred parameters established by heaven, sealed in seasons of betrayal and reinforced through pain that was never wasted. You don't say no to shut people out. You say no to protect what God placed within you. Every inch of access to your presence was purchased through sacrifice. Every boundary you hold was written with tears. You didn't learn to guard your soul from a book. You learned it in battle. You learned it in silence. You learned it when you had to rebuild what others tried to break. And so now when you say this far and no further, the spirit world recognizes it because your boundary is not a reaction. It is a declaration. They tried to guilt you into opening doors God told you to keep sealed. They attempted to crawl back through windows you've already locked in prayer. They called you unkind when you refused to explain your discernment. But you owe no explanations for the territory God has assigned you to steward. They do not understand that your no is not rejection, it is reverence, because what lives inside you is no longer up for public consumption. It is holy, it is weighty, it is wrapped in covenant, and access to it now requires alignment, not attachment. You no longer bleed to prove your worth. You no longer shrink to preserve false peace. You no longer tolerate the casual defilement of sacred space. The season of emotional trespassing is over. You have become the sanctuary. And that's why they are shocked, because they were used to the version of you who overgave, who over-explained, who allowed distortion in the name of empathy. But that version died in the wilderness. The you that stands now is fortified, not bitter, but better. Not guarded by walls of fear, but by gates of wisdom. Not harsh, but holy. They thought they could come and go, but now they find themselves at the edge of something they cannot cross. Because your boundary is not just personal, it is prophetic. It is God's way of saying, this space belongs to one I have chosen. Proceed no further unless I have sent you. You, the chosen one. What they launched against you was never just an attack on your reputation. It was an attempt to assassinate your assignment. They didn't just want to see you fall. They wanted to silence what you carry. So they whispered, conspired, and accused. They clothed their envy in concern. They distorted truth until it became unrecognizable. They called it correction, but heaven knew it was sabotage. And still you did not collapse. You did not respond in rage. You did not bend to the noise. You stood still while they threw shadows, and in that stillness your spirit rose. They expected you to crumble beneath the weight of lies. They hoped the backlash would bury your voice. They believed that rejection would break your confidence, but what they never saw coming was resurrection. You see, when the world tried to erase you, God reintroduced you. When they buried your name in rumor, heaven carved it deeper into the palms of his hands. When they tried to cancel your influence, the anointing on your life only multiplied. Because what covers you does not come from applause. It does not depend on public perception. It is rooted in something incorruptible, the Spirit of the living God. And no smear campaign can touch what God has already sealed. They may have won the moment, but you are winning the legacy. Because while they exhausted themselves spreading lies, you were quietly becoming everything they swore you'd never be. Your silence was not defeat, it was dignity. Your lack of retaliation was not weakness, it was wisdom. Heaven knew that vindication was coming not through drama but through undeniable fruit. And now their words are exposed by your walk. Their accusations are undone by your elevation. You are still standing not because you defended yourself, but because God did. And that is why they can't comprehend your rise, because it didn't come through retaliation. It came through refinement. Every attack was absorbed and turned into fuel. Every lie became a layer of armor. Every betrayal became a step toward glory. And now you walk in a victory they cannot understand because it wasn't manufactured. It was earned through fire and silence and unwavering faith. You are living proof that no smear can outlast the Spirit. No matter how loud the opposition, the truth written over your life by heaven's hand cannot be edited by man. You have become the evidence that God exalts the humble, restores the torn, and resurrects the ones the world thought it had buried. You, the chosen one, what you carry is older than this world's wisdom, deeper than its logic, and more dangerous to its illusions than it dares to admit. You do not walk in borrowed knowledge. You move with something embedded in your very being, codes, truths, and frequencies that existed long before their systems were born. What you know is not the product of information. It is the result of revelation. You remember things your mouth cannot explain, and your presence evokes things their minds cannot process. When they look at you, they feel the weight of something timeless, something sacred, something unlearned but undeniably real. You confuse them because you don't play by the patterns they've studied. You don't rely on the validations they chase. You don't move with the urgency of competition. And so they label you strange, intense, threatening, because when you stand in a room, you confront the smallness of everything they thought made them powerful. They have built their lives on titles, metrics, performance, and applause. But your power isn't measurable. Your influence isn't explainable. Because what radiates from you was not handed down by men. It was passed through lineage, spiritual, divine, ancient. There are mysteries written into your soul that their modern minds have no frame of reference for. You don't even need to speak them. Your very presence declares what their intellect cannot contain. They try to reduce you to what they can define. They try to dismiss you with labels. But deep down they know the truth. You are not functioning from the same blueprint. You don't follow formulas because you walk in alignment. You don't strategize for power because you are already seated in it, spiritually, prophetically, irrevocably. And that is what they cannot stand. You operate with access they were never granted. You embody an order they were never invited into. You carry memories your mouth doesn't recall, but your spirit executes flawlessly. You know how to move, even when you don't know how you know. You are drawn to things beyond your generation, because you are not merely of this generation. You are connected to something eternal, and that connection destabilizes the temporal structures around you. You remind them without saying a word that there is more than what they can see, more than what they can control, and more than what their minds can manage. You are a walking contradiction to their world, a disruption to their logic, a threat to their illusions. You do not belong to the system. They know it. And no matter how much they try to ignore it, your presence keeps reminding them of everything their knowledge cannot reach. You, the chosen one, what unsettles them most is not simply that you rise, but that you rise in ways they cannot explain. You survive storms that should have destroyed you. You recover from wounds that would have ended others. You prosper in places where nothing should grow. And to them it looks unfair, illogical, impossible. But to heaven it is ordered, appointed, and foretold, because you are not governed by the same laws. You move in divine timing, under divine protection, and through divine exemption. They try to apply their karmic frameworks to your life, assuming that what they did to you should return to them in kind, or that what they inflicted should have disqualified you forever. But what they fail to understand is that you are not moving in circles, you are walking in covenant. The patterns, they are trapped in endless cycles of gain and loss, manipulation and consequence. Sowing and reaping do not dictate your destiny. You live by a higher law, a sacred timeline, one that bends logic and violates expectation. Where they saw endings, God planted beginnings. Where they predicted your downfall, heaven wrote resurrection. Where they marked you as cursed, God marked you as chosen. They do not understand how every closed door became a corridor, how every betrayal became a bridge, how every delay turned into preparation. But you know, because you live in a rhythm not made by man, you are not moved by karma. You are moved by calling. That is why their attempts to calculate you have failed. That is why their predictions fall short. Because they do not realize you were never meant to follow the path they were. You were always meant to create a new one. Your existence breaks their understanding of justice, of fairness, of balance, because it reveals that divine favor is not earned, it is entrusted, and what has been entrusted to you cannot be revoked by anyone's opinion or offense. You are proof that some destinies are insulated, that some assignments are so sacred, no failure can forfeit them, and that truth crushes them, because they wanted to believe that what they did to you would echo back and haunt you, but instead it has only elevated you, not by luck, not by chance, but by the sovereign will of the one who sent you. You are not in their system. You never were. You were always walking in another realm under a higher verdict. And that truth, though unspoken, is why they cannot stop watching you. You are a reminder that heaven overrides the rules of men, and you are the living contradiction that renders their logic powerless. You, the chosen one. What they fail to understand is that your victory cannot be measured by earthly standards. You did not win by proving them wrong. You did not win by defeating your enemies or reclaiming your name through battle. No, you ascended. While they fought for applause, you reached for peace. While they scrambled for attention, you built an altar in the silence. While they chased relevance, you chose refinement. They expected retaliation. They expected you to clap back, to sink to their level, to join the drama and fight fire with fire. But you chose fire of a different kind, a holy fire that purifies instead of consumes, that elevates instead of destroys. You took the higher road, not out of weakness, but out of divine restraint. That road cost you more than they will ever know, but it gave you something they will never touch: transcendence. You rose not by stepping on others, but by surrendering your need to be understood. You walked away from what could have destroyed you, not because you couldn't fight, but because you had already won in the realm that mattered most. You chose healing over hatred. You chose silence over spectacle. You chose alignment over applause. And in doing so, you outgrew every version of yourself they thought they could control. What confuses them now is how you elevated without their validation, how you found peace without their permission, how you grew in grace while they were still tangled in bitterness. They don't understand that what lifted you was not pride, it was purpose. What elevated you was not ego, it was the weight of destiny pulling you upward. You didn't climb a ladder, they were watching a resurrection. This is why they can't move on. Because they watched you leave the arena and become something they cannot compete with. You didn't win their game, you left the game entirely. You weren't just healed. You were transformed. You weren't just vindicated. You were redefined. What they tried to bury became your altar. What they meant for evil became your platform. And now you stand where they never imagined you'd be, not just above, but beyond. You are no longer part of the equation they use to measure power. You are no longer within reach of their narratives, their systems, or their expectations. You have become a realm all your own. You did not win. You ascended. And that, above all, is what leaves them speechless. You, the chosen one. This world was never ready for what God placed within you, but readiness was never a requirement. Heaven does not wait for approval. It moves by divine appointment. And you are that appointment. You are not simply surviving. You are not merely progressing. You are the manifestation of what cannot be stopped. Every wound you endured, every betrayal you transcended, every silence you walked through, it was not in vain. It was shaping something unshakable. You are not just the aftermath of trials. You are the embodiment of triumph. You do not carry light, you emanate it. You do not just endure storms, you recalibrate atmospheres. You are not a chapter in someone else's redemption arc. You are a living declaration that the story bends when the anointing enters the room. You didn't just pass through fire. You became refined by it. You didn't just rise again. You rose different, clearer, stronger. untouchable. And now your presence is a disruption to the ordinary, a mirror to the false, a summons to the hidden. You are what heaven sends when the system needs to shake. You are what God releases when the time has come, for masks to fall, for truth to confront, and for destiny to reclaim its place. This is why you could never blend in, why the road was narrow, why isolation was necessary, why the warfare was relentless. Because your assignment is not casual, it is catalytic. You were born to shift things, not settle. You were marked to break cycles, not maintain comfort. You were destined to rise louder than lies, higher than betrayal, and farther than fear ever thought possible. So, walk now, with the full weight of who you are, not with arrogance but with clarity, not with apology but with authority, for you are not just chosen, you are sent, appointed, commissioned, guarded, anointed, awakened, and no one who encounters you truly encounters you will remain unchanged, because you are not just living proof that light wins. You are the awakening itself,